Last week we talked about how to safely raise leaf babies, and today we'll be looking at cuttings. Cuttings are much easier to propagate than leaf babies, but there are still things that can be done to improve success rate. I propagate tens of thousands every year and need to make sure that most make it, as my nursery is small, but we handle some big orders using all our space. As a result, I need to play it safe and don't take shortcuts. In this video, I'll show you exactly what I do. I will also quickly go over other methods and why I don't use them. The window to propagate cuttings is quite decent, but will depend on your climate. I am based in Australia and am lucky enough to be able to propagate cuttings from spring to early autumn. End of March is my cutoff. Autumn may be a bit too late for climates with cold, frosty and snowy winters, unless you have a heated greenhouse or indoor growing space. The absolute best time to propagate anywhere in the world, in my opinion, is mid-spring. All succulents, even those that grow in the cool season, will propagate really well. The light and weather are usually ideal, and most types of succulents will send roots down real fast. Summer can be a bit tricky, especially if you live in a climate like ours, where heat waves can be a bit brutal. But you can still propagate if you put shade cloth above your propagation station. 30% is good most of the time, though during heat waves it may need to be doubled up to 60. I avoid propagating later in autumn just because if some cuttings don't root before winter dormancy, they can die easily. Some will last the winter even without roots, but the chances of them perishing is pretty high. Size can matter, as bigger cuttings usually fare better than tiny ones. Now, many succulents will grow from the tiniest cuttings, but to be on the safe side, I would suggest to go bigger and use mature plants. Going for bigger cuttings and offsets has a few advantages. One is water storage and overall robustness, I guess, is that a word? These cuttings will be able to handle more and are resilient. Some offsets can also fall apart if you try and remove them while they are still very small. When dealing with plants such as Echeveria, the offset should have a little stalk of its own. When you take a cutting, a little wound is created, and just like with human wounds, it is a bit of a portal for all manner of disease and bacteria. To try and prevent them, the tool should be sterilized and the wound allowed to dry. This is so when the cutting is planted into potting mix where it's heaving with microbial life, they cannot get into the plant because the wound is sealed. Strictly speaking, drying is not essential, but it's definitely being safe and highly recommended. For smaller cuttings, I usually do about 1 to 2 days, and bigger, thicker ones I leave until they look dry. It's best to pop them on a clean, dry tray and leave in a dry, broad but shaded spot. When it comes to potting media, there's a few options. Personally, I just use succulent potting mix. Coarse sand or seed raising mix are fine too. People also use perlite, pumice and other media such as coir or peat moss, but I'm not a huge fan. That is not to say they don't work well. I raise my cuttings outdoors in the elements, and so perlite and pumice can become too dry too fast, and coir or peat moss can stay way too soggy after rain. They can work well in a controlled environment such as a greenhouse though. Some use water to propagate and it can work well, but I'm not too keen on this method either. Water will increase humidity around the cutting and can help fungal diseases develop. Water should also be changed every so often so bacteria don't start thriving, which makes it a bit labor intensive. Depending on the size of the cutting, you can use anything from smaller pots to trays. If you have loads of cuttings, propagating trays like these are very handy and will make it easy to remove the plant once it's rooted in and ready for repotting. As the plant doesn't have any roots, the pot doesn't need to be big or deep. I usually start with 3 to 5 centimeters. If the cutting is bigger, I'd go for a 10 centimeters quart pot. Cuttings initially don't need a lot of potting mix. The nutrients in the mix just wash away while the roots form. Plus, fungal disease can develop easier. In absence of roots, it will be wetter for longer. I find it's much better to start small and then repot once the roots have colonized the space. Protection in form of a 30% shade cloth or 50 to 60 during heat waves over 30 degrees Celsius can save your cuttings from a multitude of things. Shade cloth will reflect damaging UV rays and can save plants from sunburn. It will also stop very mild frosts, not to mention hail during those summer storms. If the shade cloth extends to the sides, it will also stop animals such as caterpillars, grasshoppers or birds nibbling on your cuttings. I'm a huge fan of raising propagations outdoors as I believe it makes the plants stronger in the long run. Because I need my plants to look spotless, the shade cloth is kind of a must. If you're not selling succulents, shade cloth is not really essential. You can raise your cuttings on a patio or even indoors if you have super bright sunny windows or a sunroom. Just keep in mind that indoors or on a patio, succulents can grow a bit leggy even with lots of light. There's lots of opinions floating around on the internet when it comes to watering cuttings, and they can all be valid. Personally, I water my cuttings for a number of reasons. 1. I find they start rooting a bit faster when watered. 2. Some smaller succulents with thin stems and leaves can actually dry out and die in absence of water. And 3. The potting mix can go hydrophobic if there is no water at all. I water the same way as I do with everything else and let the potting mix dry out between waterings. And that's it. I hope this will be helpful to someone out there. If it is, please like and comment. As always, thank you so very much for watching and see you all next time.